Hi everyone, welcome back. Last week we talked about a story with the heat from the sun. Well, we're going to have another Bible story this week with the heat from another source. But let's start in Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. This is something most of you are familiar with. We're going to start and just read the first two of the 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments were given by God to the Israelites, but they apply to us today as well. Starting verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven, above or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So God is to be the most important thing in our lives. He is to be above any other person or thing. Now, we're going to turn to Daniel and look at a time when somebody thought that you should be worshiping idols or worshiping them. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Do you think that's what God would have wanted? That would be an idol. And that would be King Nebuchadnezzar putting himself above God, because he said in verse 4, then the herald loudly proclaimed, this is what you are commanded to do, O people, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. I don't think that's what God wants, but that's what the king decreed. And what will happen if you don't? Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace. That's quite a threat. What would happen if you're thrown into a blazing furnace? You'll be burnt and die. Now, do you think that's what everybody did? Because the king said to do it. Well, let's read on. Going on to verse 12. But there were some Jews whom you have set over affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So there were some people that came to the king to complain about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they weren't following the king's rules. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? What would your answer be? That would be tough if you were before the king and he's calling you out for not worshiping him. So the king says to them, now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were asked to obey the king, which would be disobeying God, or they would be thrown into the fiery furnace, presumably to die. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king." They thought God could rescue them from the furnace. But they go on. "But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his armies to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Now, if this was up to you, would you have the strength and dedication and trust and faith in God to say, "I would be willing to be thrown into this furnace before I worship your idols"? Well, that is exactly what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. So they were bound. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So when they opened the door to the furnace to throw them in, the soldiers, the heat and flames came back on the soldiers that were throwing them in, and they were killed. So that doesn't look very good for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Can I tell you, even if I'm sitting by a fire, just a small fire outside, I smell like the smoke when I go in. They had not even a smell of the smoke on them. It's amazing. Was that luck? No, that was God. Do you think that might have changed how Nebuchadnezzar looked at it? Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and are willing to give up their lives rather than to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. So King Nebuchadnezzar recognized that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had disobeyed his order. But it was because of their faith and their trust in God, and that God saved them. Let me ask you this question. What do we put before God? Are we willing to stand up for our faith? How about just in an instance when kids are making fun of somebody else? Are we willing to stand up and say, that's wrong? That's not what God would want from us? Or do we get tied into making fun of somebody else? Do we obey God even when there's others around that are saying, oh, it's okay, you can do that? Do we trust God that He'll take care of us no matter what? It's just something for you to think about today. Because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith, they were able to witness to King Nebuchadnezzar so that he saw what God could do. This week, I want you to think of things that you can do to show your faith. What can you do to share God's love with someone around you? What can you do to stand up for what you believe in, to stand up for what God would want us to do? See you next week.